Hello everybody and welcome back to another video here on my channel. And in today's video we are actually going over every single book that I've read in the month of January, how I started off the year, which books I liked, and which book was my favorite of the month. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. For the first book that I finished in January was actually a book that I started on the 30th of December. I didn't finish this book till almost halfway through the month of January. It was actually finished on the 12th. However, I did a reading vlog on it. It is in Read It or Unhaul It, and I should have that video already posted by now. It is, or at least it was, the largest book on my physical TBR, coming in at 1,072 pages, which is none other than Stephen King's Under the Dome. I picked this up, like I said, because of the Read It or Unhaul It, and it was one that I didn't necessarily want to tackle, but since we were ending out the year, it was perfect. It was one of those perfect books to just go ahead and pick up a book. Also, I think I was still reading a book that I finished on like the final day of December that I just really did not enjoy. So it was one to kind of keep my mind off of that book because I wanted to DNF it so bad. But going into this book, I actually really enjoyed this. I felt like this was better for my time reading this book, being basically about a half a month. I felt like it was worth my time more than when I read The Stand, which I read in I think October 2024, and I read that for the most part the entire month of October. I actually really like the concept of the dome. There were some things that I don't know if it's because I was sick or some other things, maybe I read it too fast, or if I was listening to it with the audiobook, maybe I kind of tuned it out. There were some things I was a little bit confused on, like how exactly did this happen? Why did Stephen King maybe write it like this? But overall, I feel like this book was pretty good. I rated this actually 4.5 stars. We were starting the month off, starting the whole year off on a really good note, and it's definitely one that I recommend. But if you don't think that you can handle 1,000 pages, or even maybe some parts that I feel like the pacing was pretty decent, but it wasn't jam-packed with adventure. I felt like it was more of a character development in a way type book, but also with some plot, some adventure, some random crazy things happening. I just felt like the overall story is we're following these set of characters from the beginning. Most of them do stay alive, some of them actually end up dying. We have problems, everybody has their own issues, own type of things that are going on with them, and we get all of their problems, everything that happens, they all get resolved, whether that be because of death or because they actually resolved them, like they figured out what was wrong. I definitely recommend this, but like I said, if you don't think you can get through 1,000 pages, maybe not necessarily pick it up, maybe pick a shorter one of his books up. But if you also can find the audiobook, which I happen to have the audiobook, ironically at the same time I picked this up, it was available on Libby for me. If you can get your hands on an audiobook and read this as well, I think it would be so much easier for you. And I mean, I did that. It helped me a lot because there were some days where I just did not feel like physically sitting and reading this book. Like I maybe read some of it physically in that same day, but also there were times where I wanted to read it, but I was out doing something outside, or I was doing laundry, or I was cleaning the house. And this helped a lot to have the audiobook because it was so chunky, and I feel like it helped me too when around the 500 or so page mark. I think it was actually like 400 to 500, like high 400s. I hadn't even hit an exact 50%. I was at like 48 or 49%, and I was getting very discouraged because I was like, we're so far into this book and I'm not even halfway. So I think the audiobook helped me a lot there and kept me from getting really discouraged. Then after Stephen King, I actually hopped into a different audiobook, and this is the first book of this 5 novels in one by Agatha Christie, The Murder at the Vicarage. And I enjoyed this book. It wasn't necessarily one of my favorites from her. I was cleaning the house when I threw this on, and the audiobook itself was only about 2 hours. It was fairly short, and I did like in specific one character. She is a maid. I like in the audiobook whoever voiced her, the attitude and the just sass, I'm gonna say, that she put into this character. And I feel like if I would have read it, maybe I would have read it just like that. But this one maid, this one person who kept coming in, a lot of people did not necessarily like her because she wasn't doing things about the right way. Like she wouldn't knock on the door, she would just kind of barge in, and just her attitude at the same time I thought was hilarious. And I liked the story. Like I said, it wasn't my favorite from Agatha Christie, but I did rate it 3 stars. It was pretty decent. And also I really liked at the end how this book wrapped up, especially after the twist we got. We didn't get like definite clues or definite facts and things that go along with how, I'm gonna say, the case was ended, but at the same time I felt like it was kind of unique in that way because it wasn't like stone cold hard facts, and I liked it. I definitely recommend it. It just wasn't one of the strong ones from her. And next, coming in at 4.5 stars, I went into The Lightkeeper's Ball. This is the final book in the Mercy Falls trilogy, and I was so excited to pick this up. I ended up loving this book so much. This is definitely one of my favorites. I don't know, I think the second one is still my favorite, but this one was a very close second. If not, it's very much like the first one. I think all of these books I rated 4.5 stars, give or take. I'd say 4 at the bare minimum. This is a 4.5 star series in my opinion. This is the best series I've read from Colleen Cobble. It helps that it's around the time period I really love, and just how she has made all of the characters. And in this one in specific, you have this mystery that's going on, and it's very much like a murder is happening, and it's really unique in its own way. And also with that, you have the airplanes that are basically being created, and our male main character, he actually has a couple, but his dad doesn't like that he's in the aeroplane airplane business. And one time when he took her up, the first time he took her up in the airplane, they actually ended up crashing, and it was very interesting, that whole situation. And I liked where that was, I feel like, a very big turning point. And some of the things between the two characters I really enjoyed. I liked this friendship, this relationship. I liked a lot of things about this. I liked the ending, and I loved we have some conclusion to some of our other characters from the past books at the end of this book. And I mean, we had them throughout the whole book, but I thought this was so interesting. And like I said, it was 4.5 stars. I really enjoy this. I highly recommend Calling Cobble. Next, at 3.5 stars, I hopped back into an Agatha Christie book, and this was actually Sad Cypress. And again, we're following Detective Poirot, I do believe is how you say his name, and he is one of my favorite characters. He's got a whole series to himself, and I love that. He's definitely one of the best detectives, and I think that Agatha Christie did a great job at writing his character. And he's got some sass to him, some attitude to himself, but at the same time, it's like he does his job well. And in this book, I thought it was really unique, really interesting, because instead of proving who a murderer is, Agatha Christie wrote this book as Poirot is trying to basically prove that somebody is innocent instead of that he is the murderer. So I found that plot, or that little section of the book, very interesting, and I like this book a lot more than the other book, but I don't know which one. I think still And Then There Were None. It's just a classic book. That's probably my favorite book from Agatha Christie, but this one is very far up there. I think honestly it's because of Detective Poirot. I think because he is my favorite character, that every time I read a book and he's in it, I just know I'm gonna have a fun time. It's gonna be a 3.5 to maybe 4-star book. Then I hopped into Freida McFadden's The Tenant. I had recently just went with my husband. He asked me one day if we wanted to drop off our son at his mom's, and then if he wanted to take me to a date, and we went and seen The Housemaid because I read The Housemaid. That was a really fun date, and also we hadn't really had a night out by ourselves, just truly by ourselves like this, so it was really fun. And also I liked when we went, I watched The Housemaid, and because of that I felt like I wanted to pick up the only other book from Freida McFadden I had on this list. And also I wanted something that maybe would keep my attention a little bit more, because I had read a lot of good books, but I just was feeling not necessarily like I was going in a slump, just that I needed some more excitement in a book, or like fast-paced, bingeable. And of course Freida McFadden is that. She has bingeable books, and I enjoyed this. I thought this was a little bit different because I thought this was a apartment complex, and the tenant is underneath, like we're following the actual landlord, and some things go on. And I mean, it's kind of similar to that, but at the same time I felt like the twists were a little bit different and the overall story was different. But I liked how we're following this main character and his wife, and then he loses his job. After he loses his job, he gets like fired because of one specific thing that happens. He ends up not doing well, or they end up not really doing well, and they can't really afford, I think it's called a brownstone in New York or something, and they have this house and they can't really afford their rent or their mortgage, whichever it is. So then they end up trying to pick up this tenant, and this tenant moves in and some bad stuff starts happening, and I was hooked the entire time. I thought this was so good, so bingeable. I did only rate it 4 stars, so it wasn't my top book from her, but I think also because I've been reading of I think like 4 of her books already, so this one being my 4th or so book, I felt like it was pretty good. I was a little bit predictable, and I feel like I'm getting to the point where a lot of her books I'm seeing a lot of similarities, but I've also seen where apparently this book wasn't written the same as all her other books, and I can kind of see that. But I thought overall, if you like all of her other books, you're still gonna like this one just as much. I think there were at some points a little dry spots or little slow spots, but for the most part it was very fast-paced, bingeable, and I really not necessarily like the characters, I just kind of like what went on in this book, except for one thing in specific. And I will say this one thing once, because this is probably the only time ever I have almost truly gagged and almost have thrown up, and it's about the chow mein, the lo mein, whichever, if it was lo or chow, I don't even care. That spot talking about the noodles made me want to throw up, I'm not gonna lie. So I give Freida McFadden a little points deducted for that, just because I didn't like that. Otherwise the rest of it I felt like was really good. And then I hopped into the second book in the Percy Jackson series. This is The Sea of Monsters, and I like this book. It wasn't as good as the first book to me. I think I rated the first book 4.5 stars, and this one just being 3.5 stars, but I liked how we're still following the same characters, and also there is some similarities that he has from the last books to this book. Some similarities that I'm talking about are kind of like how in the first book Rick Riordan talked about how you can see the gods or the work of gods throughout all of our history and random monuments, statues, things like that in our real world. And in this book he continues that, and he talks about more things that you can see, and I find that interesting. I like the adventure that we went on. I thought in a way the adventure in this book was a little bit more unique than the last one, but I don't think I was as invested into this book as the last one. I do like the friend that we meet in the very I think it's like the first page. Something happens at his school, and I like that friend, and then how we kind of go into the rest and how we learn about what cyclopses are, or cyclope, I don't remember how it is, but I thought this was kind of interesting. But I'm more excited for the next couple books, and I'm kind of also excited to finish the series. I hate to say that. Probably in the next couple months I will will be trying to pick up the third book, and then eventually before 2026 ends, I would love to have finished this entire series. And finally, we end off the month on a good note. Coming in at 4 stars, we have another Colleen Cobble book. This is a standalone called Strands of Truth, and I really enjoyed this book. I love the characters. I love the male main character and the female main character. I like their friendship, their relationship, and then also some of the things that was going on. In this book, we have our female main character, and she actually finds out that she has a half-sister, and both her and her half-sister both had moms that tragically died in one way or another. The first one had one that was like a murder itself, and then the second one, which is our one that we're following, she actually had her mom and it was like deemed as an accident. It has been suspected also that it's been a murder. They've been trying to find their dad, but their dad is non-existent, but they have the same dad apparently. And some of the things that happened in this book, I did call the dad and the fiance at the time. I did call that, and I just thought it was so absurd. I was like, no way, these are the people. There's no way, because I called it fairly early, probably like 30% into the book. And then as we went on, I was like, I have no clue who the person is going to be, because usually I feel like I can predict them a little bit, but because I kept thinking back to that couple, I'm gonna say, I could not figure out who it was. So by the end, when we got revealed and it was the people I originally thought around that 30% mark, I was like, oh my gosh, I knew that. I literally thought it was so wrong, so far-fetched, and here I am. It was right. I enjoyed this. I like some of the things that really happen because it is more of like the murder type side, and also I think she's this like pen shell bed or something where she's selling these sea creatures or sea clams or whatever they are, and she sells them for meat, and then also she's trying to grow them and she's studying them. And I like her, not father, but her father figure that she does have, and he kind of saved her from all these foster homes, and she has a bad kind of tragic past in a way. I like his character. It's just kind of sad, something that kind of happens, but I also see why it happened. And then there's some other things about other characters that I was like, oh, this is great. I like the turning around point. I like how she's talking about God and some things about like forgiveness and other great things that we need to be aware of and taught and just listen about. And also one other thing in specific, she has a friend who is married or engaged to this guy, and they're both in the Coast Guard. And in my mind, I was like, going back to the beginning of 2025, I read a series from her called the Hope Beach Trilogy. There were 2 characters across, I think, the whole series, every single book that was talked about, and I kept going back to them, and I was like, these sound like the exact same people from that series. And I was like, no, it's got to be wrong. There's no way. She hasn't said anything. Well, then we get to like the final chapter or the final epilogue or whatever it was, and all of a sudden we get insight that they were from Hope Beach, and we had the characters from the Hope Beach trilogy from each of those books. They all showed up, and I was like, you know what? I knew I did a good job at reading that series first and then going into this, because the spines look very similar, even though they are not in the same series as this is standalone, but they are kind of in a way interconnected, and I love that about that. I thought that was such a great little like Easter egg in a way, and I was so excited because it kept bugging me the entire book, where I was like, I swear these are the same 2 people from that series. Turns out they were, which I thought was like the perfect cherry on top. Overall, I feel like I can't go wrong with a Colleen Cobble book, and I love her little snippets about God. I love all of her mysteries, all of her potential murder plots, and also I love how I rate most of her books, if not all of them, a 4 to a 4.5 star range. So here are the 7 books that I read in the month of January. I feel like I started off the month on a very good note, considering I had no bad books. Technically 3-star was, I think, the lowest that I rated a book, and we had a very chunky book to start it off, and I still read this many books. So this was a great little achievement for me, and I'm so happy, and I'm hoping that the rest of the year will turn out just like this month was. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some monthly statistics. Starting with my 26 books that I want to read in 2026, I actually accomplished 3 books from that list, which was like 11.5%. So basically, if you round up, it's about 12% accomplished. So excited about that. I was not expecting in the first month to go ahead and cross off 3 of those books. And those 3 books were The Tenant by Frida McFadden, The Lightkeeper's Ball by Colleen Cobble, and finally The Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie. All right, now we're talking about my physical TBR. So technically, when I started the year off, I was around 75 books. However, right behind me, there's another Agatha Christie book. It's a 5 novels in one as well. So I added 5 books right off the bat to my physical TBR, and then I went to my public library and I bought 2 books, or I brought home 2 books. So we went from 75 books on my physical TBR all the way up to 82 books. Technically, I read 7 books from my physical TBR, but I also am getting rid of ACOTAR. I'm not gonna read that book, and I don't really feel like it, so I'm just gonna get rid of it to Half Price Books when I go, probably in a couple days with my ma to go pick up, since we have some coupons. And I have now officially went from 75 books on my physical TBR only down to 74 books. But that's because we added 2, went all the way up to 82, and now we're at 74. And also when I go to Half Price Books, don't worry, I'm mainly trying to switch out things that I have, like maybe Nicholas Sparks, go in hardcover. There's some things on the top shelf, like Percy Jackson, I want a hardcover set, things like that. So I'm not really trying to add to my physical TBR. I'm mainly just going to be buying books to switch out my paperbacks to my hardbacks. I also keep track of the series that I'm in the middle of. I just recently started doing that last year, probably about halfway through the year, and officially I've accomplished one series from that list. I have no clue how many series I'm actually in the middle of. I could count them right now. Apparently I'm in the middle of 13 series, but at least 2 of those I cannot actually read the next book because they have not come out just yet. However, the only one that I have accomplished is the Mercy Falls trilogy. That is the Lightkeeper's Daughter, Lightkeeper's Bride, and also Lightkeeper's Ball. A new thing that I added to my book journal this year was actually an alphabet challenge, and this is not saying like, oh, I have to read every single letter of the alphabet. I just wanted to write down every time I finish a book if one is open. For the Tenant, that's a T, so I wrote down the Tenant underneath T. I'm just trying to see how many letters of the alphabet I can read in a year. Not that I have to. So we have M already crossed off for the Murder at the Vicarage, L for the Lightkeeper's Ball, S for Sad Cypress, T for the Tenant, and finally U for Under the Dome. Also with my reading bingo, we don't have a bingo just yet. I probably could have almost made one, but we have a few spots that I have taken. We have a book over 600 pages being Under the Dome, a book rated 3 stars or lower on Goodreads, which was actually Sad Cypress, a thrifted book, which was Strands of Truth, a YA book being Percy Jackson #2, a free space, just a random book on my TBR, which was The Murder at the Vicarage, finished a series being The Lightkeeper's Ball, and finally a female author being The Tenant. Also new to my reading journal, I added in a 2026 reading challenge. These are just random things. I just wanted another challenge and I felt like this was a good one. I did go ahead and cross off 4 of these. So the first one was bought at half price books. That was the Lightkeeper's Ball and I accomplished that. I also have illustrated cover, which is Percy Jackson #2, The Sea of Monsters, released in 2025. I meant to say 2026, but it kind of worked out great because 2025 was actually The Tenant. And the final thing, we had numbers for chapter titles, which was Strands of Truth by Colleen Cowell. So in total this month, I read 7 books, coming in at 2,612 pages. I had 0 5-star reads. However, my favorite book of the month was The Lightkeeper's Ball by Colleen Cowell. And that is everything that I have for the month of January. That is my January wrap up. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys haven't seen my February TBR, what books I added to my TBR, and somehow what book I actually got to add to my TBR, click back and watch that video if you haven't seen any of my reading vlogs. And if you're curious about my either Read It or Unhaul It or any other future reading vlogs, go ahead, click back on my channel, watch any of those videos, or go ahead and subscribe to keep up with future videos. I'm kind of trying in a way to do maybe a reading vlog every single month or at least every other month. I feel like that would be kind of interesting to add to my channel, and it's also one of those things that it's almost like a 2026 goal. But thank you all again so much. I hope to see you in another video here on my channel, and as always, God bless.